for the homeland and freedom. The Rákóczi War of Independence, 1703 to 1711. In June 1703, a young Ferenc Rákóczi and his mounted entourage of elegantly dressed men wandered lost through the gorges of the Carpathian Mountains in search of the road to Hungary. The 27-year-old imperial prince, once the wealthiest man in Hungary, had been exiled for 2 years to Poland, fleeing Emperor Leopold's death sentence. Implored to return by his peasants, who'd risen against Habsburg oppression, he returned to spearhead their uprising. Eventually, in the Polish village of Klimniec, Rákóczi's men and the peasant army led by Tomasz Esse would meet. The encounter was a mutual disappointment. Esse and his followers had assumed Rákóczi would arrive heading up foreign mercenaries, and Rákóczi was dismayed to find only 200 armed peasants and 50 horsemen instead of the thousands promised. Were they to confront Emperor Leopold, Europe's most powerful ruler, with this paltry force? Though Rákóczi greeted them with a rousing speech, he spent the following 2 days contemplating his options. Finally, on June the 16th, at the Verecke Pass, where Árpád had 800 years earlier led the Hungarian tribes over the border, Rákóczi made his decision. As he would write in his memoirs, it was like Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon. So why did young Rákóczi take the lead in the uprising? Why did the Hungarians repeatedly turn against their legitimate rulers? And was there any purpose to this long struggle? Habsburgs and Hungarians. Since 1526, Habsburg rulers had occupied the throne of the Kingdom of Hungary. Holding the title of Holy Roman Emperor, the 16th century saw them establish the Habsburg Empire in the heart of Europe. This included Hungary. Whilst the empire laid the foundations of absolutist royal power in its other territories, known as the hereditary lands, the Kingdom of Hungary would retain its autonomy. Hungary was to be governed by its own laws, and Habsburg rulers had to take an oath to respect and uphold these. Their mutual interdependence resulting from the Ottoman conquests further intensified the need for cooperation. Following the Ottoman campaign of 1663 to 1664, the situation changed drastically. Despite the Ottomans' initial success, the Allied Christian armies achieved a momentous victory at St. Gotthard, raising Hungarians' hopes that this battle would lead to their liberation. Such hopes were short-lived, however, when Emperor Leopold made peace with the Sultan. Despite the Turks' defeat, the Vosvár Peace Treaty of 1664 left the newly conquered territories in Ottoman hands. This highlighted that the Austrian government did not prioritize the liberation of Hungary. Consequently, disappointed Hungarian magnates, led by the Palatine Ferenc Wesselényi, began to conspire against the Habsburgs. Hungarians had always been inept conspirators, and the plot was soon discovered. As a result, in 1671, Chief Justice Count Ferenc Nándordi and Ban Péter Zrínyi of Croatia were beheaded. Imre Tököly's movement. A significant number of Hungarians turned against Vienna in a movement led by the highly talented military leader Imre Tököly. Following the successful so-called Kuruc anti-Habsburg uprising, Tököly was elected Prince of Upper Hungary in 1682, thus dividing the country into 4 parts. Tököly's movement and short-lived princedom relied on the Ottoman Empire's support. When the Turks attacked Vienna in 1683, Tököly's forces acted as auxiliary troops under Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa's command. However, Kara Mustafa suffered defeat, and the successful defense of Vienna brought a turning point in Habsburg policy. Under Emperor Leopold's leadership, an international Christian coalition was formed to liberate Hungary. Hungarians fought on both sides in the war, with the remnants of Tukuli's troops on the Ottoman side and others on the side of the Christian alliance. 15,000 Hungarians battled for the recapture of Buda in 1686. The cooperation was crowned a success, and step by step, in the years that followed, the Allied forces drove the Ottomans out of Hungary. The Christian army's successes led to the decline of Tukuli's movement. He was first captured by the Turks and later employed as a military leader. A decisive liberation battle took place in Zenta in 1697. The army, led by Eugene of Savoy, confronted Sultan Mustafa II's forces. Tukuli was fighting as one of the Sultan's commanders. The Christian forces were victorious, and Tukuli only just managed to escape. A notable feature of Hungarian historical memory is seen in the fact that Tukuli's statue stands in Budapest's Heroes' Square, whilst that of Eugene of Savoy, the victorious leader in the Battle of Zenta, is in front of the royal palace overlooking the city. The winner's right. Emperor Leopold, who also held the title of King of Hungary, firmly believed that liberating Hungary would grant him both the opportunity and right to incorporate the country into his empire. During the meeting of Parliament in 1687, the Hungarian estates were forced to surrender their right to elect the monarch as well as their right of resistance. Following the liberation from Ottoman rule, Hungary was laden with excessively high taxes, pushing the war-ravaged country to the brink of poverty. Former landowners could only reclaim their land with documentary evidence of ownership, no easy feat after decades of war, and if they paid 10% of their estate's value to the treasury. Soldiers stationed at the borders were discharged, whilst both nobles and peasants suffered violence at the hands of the occupying Austrian troops. As such, Hungarians had every reason to feel that their liberation was merely the beginning of another occupation. The young Rákóczi. Ferenc Rákóczi II hailed from Hungary's most illustrious family, with 6 Transylvanian princes among his ancestors, including the Rákóczis and the Bátoris. His maternal grandfather was Péter Zrínyi, the executed leader of the Veselényi conspiracy. From the age of 9, Rákóczi accompanied his stepfather, Imre Tukuli, on his military campaigns. During his childhood, he witnessed the siege of Munkács, where for 3 years his mother, Ilona Zrínyi, defended the castle against the imperial forces. He would later become permanently separated from his mother, receiving a strict pro-Habsburg upbringing. Emperor Leopold graciously overlooked his rebellious ancestral heritage, even granting him the title of imperial prince. Initially, Rákóczi proved himself gracious and loyal. However, despite his attempts to ignore his providence, the sense of duty that came with his position, the traditions of his ancestors, alongside the expectations of his environment, proved greater. In 1700, he wrote in secret to King Louis XIV of France. Such action was a grave offense, and, unfortunately for Rákóczi, it did not remain a secret. He was arrested and taken to the prison of Wiener Neustadt, where Péter Zrínyi had formerly been imprisoned. The charge of treason and his pending fate was the same as his grandfather's 30 years prior. However, with the help of his wife, he managed to escape in disguise, fleeing to Poland. In the summer of 1703, he returned to Hungary to lead the rebels. The War of Independence. The international situation played a significant role in Rákóczi crossing his own Rubicon. By that time, France and Austria's rivalry for European hegemony had escalated into full-scale war, and he was assured of the support of France's King Louis XIV. Upon news of his arrival, people flocked to Rákóczi's banner, which displayed his motto Cum Deo pro patria et libertate, with God for the homeland and liberty. Previous victories meant that everyone, from simple peasants, impoverished men, and Kuruc soldiers to nearby townsfolk and the county nobility, all rallied to his side. Sándor Károly, for example, who had dispersed the rebel forces in June, pledged his allegiance to Rákóczi in October. The imperial troops could not mount a strong resistance as their main forces were engaged in battle against the French. Thus, by the fall, the rebels were free to occupy the territory east of the river Tisza and Upper Hungary, today's Slovakia. By December 1703, Károly's forces had penetrated Austria, reaching the outer ramparts defending Vienna. The following year saw a succession of military successes, with the Kuruc forces taking Transdanubia and Transylvania. Only the borderlands defended by the Serbians and the Saxon territories remained under imperial control. However, it was in Bavaria, not in Hungary, that the decisive battle of the War of Independence took place. Rákóczi and his followers' main hopes lay in joining forces with the French Bavarian army, which was advancing eastward, and capturing Vienna. However, in the summer of 1704, King Louis XIV's troops suffered a severe defeat against the Austrian-British forces at Hochstadt in Bavaria, referred to as Blenheim in British history. From that point on, French support declined dramatically, and after 1708 ceased completely. The reality of Rákóczi's War of Independence becoming a part of the European struggle for power faded completely, and Hungary was left to its fate. In the years that followed, battles continued with varying degrees of success. Imperial forces prevailed in all major engagements, even when they were outnumbered. The main weakness of the Kuruc army was the peasant soldiers' lack of military training, the officers' frequent incompetence, the lack of military discipline, and inadequate equipment. The Kuruc army was equipped with far fewer cannons and outdated guns. Despite the imperial army's victories, it didn't have the manpower necessary to occupy the country. Meanwhile, the Kuruc army enjoyed the support of the population in Upper Hungary and the Great Hungarian Plain, which helped them win smaller battles. Aided by these successes, they were able to occupy a greater part of Hungary for an extended period, and sometimes the whole country. Leader and Prince. From the outset, Rákóczi was averse to being regarded as a rebel by foreign governments, so he needed to create a legal framework around his uprising. The National Assembly convened in Széchenyi in 1705 established a noble confederation and elected him leader and prince, dux et princeps. In 1707, the National Assembly in Ornod declared the Hungarian throne vacant and refused to recognize Leopold's son Joseph as the rightful heir. As Miklós Bercsényi, the commander-in-chief of the Kuruc forces, put it, "Dogs should rule over dogs, and from this day on, Joseph is no longer our king." Rákóczi did not wish to be accused of self-interest in ascending the throne, instead aiming to find a suitable ruler to resolve the country's diplomatic isolation. However, his efforts were unsuccessful. The Kurucs and the Labancs. History recalls Rákóczi's soldiers as the Kurucs, whilst those who served in the imperial army and remained loyal to the court were called the Labancs. The term Labancs was originated from the word lobons, denoting a trend at the time of wearing elaborate wigs. Whilst the Transdanubian region's Catholic nobility were generally regarded as Labancs, the Protestants from the Great Hungarian Plain were more often associated with the Kuruc. This division caused many families to be split in their allegiances. For example, Prince and Palatine Pál Esterházy remained loyal to the emperor, while Count Antal Esterházy achieved military success as a Kuruc general. Many switched sides from the Labancs to the Kuruc, as exemplified by the case of Vak Bottyán. Bottyán, a soldier of lesser noble descent, participated in the campaigns that drove out the Ottomans. Although he lost an eye in battle, legend had it that bullets could not harm his body. On one occasion, as a colonel in the imperial army, Bottyán challenged the bravest Kuruc warrior to a duel. Though severely wounded, a few months later saw him up and serving in Rákóczi's army. He became one of the Kuruc force's most successful generals. The fall of the Rákóczi War of Independence and the Szatmár peace treaty. By 1710, the Kurucs found themselves in dire military straits. The country had exhausted its resources, and the Kuruc army was forced to retreat to just a few counties in eastern Hungary. With the Franco-Austrian peace treaty, Rákóczi lost a potential ally, and his attempts to forge new alliances proved fruitless. In light of these circumstances, Rákóczi travelled to Poland, while in 1711 his deputy, Sándor Károly, and the Hungarian-born commander of the imperial forces in Hungary, Count János Pálffy, signed a peace agreement. As before, this accord reflected a compromise. The emperor pledged to uphold the laws of Hungary and Transylvania, to recognize the nobility's privileges, Protestants' rights, and grant amnesty to all participants of the War of Independence. Called the Peace Treaty of Szatmár, Emperor Joseph was no longer alive when it was signed on his behalf in Nagy Károly. On April 30, 1711, on the plains of Mohytín, Rákóczi's forces planted their flags into the ground as a symbolic gesture before disbanding, retaining their weapons. The Rákóczi emigration. Rákóczi did not seize the opportunity for clemency. Renouncing his wealth and possessions, he sought patrons for the Hungarian cause. Initial attempts to find them were in France, then in the Ottoman Empire, but his hopes were never fulfilled. The Sultan interned him with a handful of his followers in Tekirdağ, where he passed the time by attending Mass, writing, reading, and carpentry. There he would die in 1735. Although Rákóczi's movement did not achieve its main goal, it was certainly not in vain, as it prevented the Habsburgs from achieving total subjugation of Hungary. In 1906, his ashes were brought back home to the Cathedral of Kossuth, so his final resting place could be in Hungary. Even this aim was later thwarted, however, as the Peace Treaty of Trianon, signed just a few years later, awarded the town of Kossuth to Czechoslovakia. In consequence, the remains of Rákóczi, leader and prince of the Hungarian War of Independence, lie in present-day Slovakia.